I don't know, like I think growing up, like I didn't realize like how much I I don't know how to say it, like white supremacy like existed. Like because I don't know, you turn on the TV and you only see like white families, and then like in the community you're only spending time with white families. So I think like in my head I thought like, oh, it's like such a like you kind of want to be like in close proximity to whiteness, I guess, if that makes sense. Like I kind of thought like, oh, it's like it's a compliment when my friends are saying, oh, Kaitlin, like you're whitewashed. Like I used to think that that was a good thing, but then growing up I've realized like that's kind of messed up that I would think that it's a compliment to be something other than what my background actually is. And so as I've gotten older, I've learned to have more pride in who I am as an Asian woman.
請勿靠近車門，請不要靠近車門。Please stand back from the doors.
Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome back to What Kind of Asian Are You podcast, a podcast featuring conversations about being Asian. I am your host. My name is Kyle. For all the new listeners, thank you for joining us. And just to let you guys know, this is a podcast where I interview diaspora Asians about their life stories and experiences. This podcast looks to highlight, amplify, and validate Asian voices worldwide. And if you are keen to support this podcast and support Asian storytelling, please continue listening. Please subscribe to this podcast on wherever you listen to podcasts on. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, What Kind of Asian Are You podcast, and also share with your friends and family and follow this podcast on Instagram at What Kind of Asian Pod. And if you're an Apple listener, please leave a review and rating for us. It will greatly help this podcast grow. And now to today's guest. This guest is for me really special because I got introduced to her from the other podcast that I do with a friend, Robin. The podcast is called Never Jaded Podcast. It started out as a movie podcast where we just watch movie, review it with someone, and that was pretty much it. And this guest was on for an episode where we review a Netflix movie. Let me get the name right. And it should be To All the Boys Always Forever. So we interview her to get her thoughts and feelings about that movie, that and just did a review. We had a really fun time, and beyond just having her on as a guest on the previous podcast, Never Jaded, we kind of built a friendship, kind of knowing what she kind of do, and it's really cool because she does a lot of different things. But we'll get into all of that. But I want her to introduce herself more. So for my introduction of her, she is just a really cool person with a lot of different interests, hobbies, and does a lot of cool like social media stuff also in the podcasting realm. So without further ado, this is Kaitlin Jingco from Learn with Lels podcast and blogs. Hi, Kaitlin. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Very excited to have you on because I've been wanting to have you on for a longest time. And I think I kind of told you that too. And now it finally links up and that we're having an episode where we just talk about you, your story. Because last time we didn't really get into who you really are because we just focused on reviewing the movie, which you enjoyed. So it's nice to have you back on, to talk more about your story.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, I had a lot of fun the last time when we were chatting. I really liked To All the Boys I Loved Before, but you didn't really seem to like it all that much.
Or maybe
But
I
I
was just
liked it.
indifferent.
I
But
thought it was a good movie.
yeah. Well, if people want to hear Caitlin's thoughts on the movie, you could check out Never Jaded Pod. Yeah, you'll find it there. I think it's episode 8 or something. Anyways, back to Caitlin herself, her story. So for all the audience that is tuning in, can you just let them know who you are, what you're about, and most importantly, what kind of Asian are you?
Sure. So, as you said, my name's Kaitlin Jingco. I live in Toronto, Canada. I recently just moved here actually in May, and it's been a lot of fun. But yeah, as you said, I have a podcast and blog called Learn with Lels. And Lels is what my family calls me. I don't know why. There's no reason. They just called me that. But yeah, so my blog is basically about lifelong learning. It actually started out as I wanted to start learning how to longboard dance and also how to cook. Um, so then I was just like talking about that. And then I kind of ended up just talking about like what I'm learning in my life as like a 20 something. Yeah, but then as I was writing, I just felt like such a narcissist talking about my life. So then I was like, oh, I feel like I need to talk to other people about what they're learning and what they're going through. So that's why I started a podcast to kind of share other people's stories other than just my own. And what kind of Asian am I? Like, well, my family is Filipino. My parents were born in the Philippines and came to Canada when they were teenagers. And yeah, I was born here in Canada, but my background is Filipino.
That's awesome. And how long have you been doing the blog and the podcast for?
Um, that's a good question. I think a couple years now. Maybe like 2 or 3 years, but I always find that I take a lot of breaks. Like right now, I'm kind of taking a break. Like when I moved to Toronto, I was like, oh, I just want to like fully experience like Toronto living as a single girl on her own for the first time. So yeah, I've just been like going to work and trying to like experience the city life rather than being busy with blogging and podcasting. But yeah, so probably about like 2 to 3-ish years. But I feel like I always had blogs like after I finished school, just like kind of random like one-off blogs that I would write. But this one is the one that's kind of stuck that I've been doing more consistently.
That's great. And we'll get into like your blogs, your podcasts, and like your journey being like a creative and all that stuff. But I really want to get started from the very beginning. So talking about like where you grew up, how was growing up like for you, and like kind of your kind of childhood, and talk a little bit about like you mentioned your family is Filipino. They came from the Philippines, got into Canada, and you mentioned that you didn't grow up technically in Toronto. So can you just talk about all that kind of how it all started and like your thoughts about your childhood and all that stuff?
Mhm, for sure. So I was born and raised in a little town called Curtis, Ontario, which is like an hour east of Toronto. And it was great. Like it was a great place to grow up. Like my sisters and I, we had a good childhood. Like our parents put us in a lot of like extracurricular activities, like lots of sports and stuff. And I still have like a lot of my good girlfriends from Curtis. But it wasn't a super diverse town. Like it was a very white town, and my family was like one of just like a handful of Asian families. So I feel like, yeah, I don't know, that was like an interesting experience to be kind of like the one Asian family in the community. And then when I went away to university, I went to McMaster. And when I moved out of Curtis, I was like, whoa, what the heck? Like there's so many Asians here. Like I was so excited to like meet other people who kind of had similar backgrounds and families as me. So that was exciting. But yeah, it was interesting growing up in Curtis. A good experience, but yeah, a real lack of diversity that I didn't really think about too much until I moved out of Curtis.
That's really interesting. And when you say you're like the only Asian family in that kind of community, were you able to still kind of like, because taken from my own experience, so I grew up in like the Greater Toronto area, specifically Markham, where other than my own Asian family, there was other Asian family that were like me. So when I did see Asian family, it wasn't just, oh, my own family, but for you, I guess it's more like whenever you do see an Asian family, it would be like, oh, your family or family friends. Is that the case? Or were you able to interact with like other Asian families that's outside your community when you're like going for like holidays or anything like that?
Um, Basically, all the Asians that I knew growing up were in my family. And yeah, it was just like a town of like basically all white people, which I feel like definitely shaped the way I thought. I don't know, like I think growing up, like I didn't realize like how much I I don't know how to say it, like white supremacy like existed. Like cuz I don't know, you turn on the TV and you only see like white families, and then like in the community you're only spending time with white families. So I think like in my head I thought like, oh, it's like such a, like you kind of want to be like in close proximity to whiteness, I guess, if that makes sense. Like I kind of thought like, oh, it's like it's a compliment when my friends are saying, "Oh, Kaitlin, like you're whitewashed." Like I used to think that that was a good thing, but then growing up, I've realized like that's kind of messed up that I would think that it's a compliment to be something other than what my background actually is. And so as I've gotten older, I've learned to have more pride in who I am as an Asian woman.
That's great. And you talking about like trying to unlearn what you have like experienced all your life. Like, do you think you really started to like go through that process, like maybe possibly after you left for university at McMaster, where it should be a little more diverse and like where you see a lot more other Asians? Like, how was your unlearning process like? Because some people it could just really be easy, like, oh, I just immersed back into other cultures, other identities, but it could be a hard process for anyone because it's just so much uh put into you when you're starting right from like you go to school, right? So
Hmm.
can you just talk about how
Yeah.
was that unlearning process for you? That I'm sure you're still going through that because I think it's a lifelong thing for a lot of Asians where they grew up where it's like I need to be as white as I could so that I can fit in, or like
Hmm.
my parents or like my family is like, oh, you got to be better in English, or like you got to like do or hang out with those kind of people, and like but at the same time they'd be like, you still are Filipino, so or Asian, whatever it may be. So how was that unlearning process for you?
Yeah, it's confusing. I think. Um, but I feel like it was like a nice awakening. Like I've made so many friends at McMaster who were Asian, and it was like, oh, you guys are awesome. And like I'm embarrassed to think that like, oh, I wanted to be closer to whiteness when like I met all my friends at Mac who are Asian, and it's like you guys are great, and it's just stupid that I could have ever thought otherwise. Um, so yeah, it was like a cool awakening.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know. And I think like it's really important for a lot of like Asian diaspora who went through like, oh, the concept of like, oh, white is, or at least hang out with white or being as whitewashed as possible is a good thing. Because I think, especially now with like diversity representation, is like it gives the younger generations like an easier path to accept that, oh, that white supremacy is a thing and that we need to fight it or like go against it because it's not the way to go. But for maybe people from our generation or even a generation above, it's even though we see like representation or like diversity, all that stuff, it's still so much included in ourselves of like, oh, white supremacy, and that the fact of like, oh, how colonization has affected all of us regardless where we're from in Asia. That unlearn, like
Hmm.
for me, I feel like I'm going through my process of like decolonizing just how I see things and how I feel and what I consume, because I think that really affects my self-esteem, my understanding of my culture, and also kind of how I go upon dealing with other people, even that are not of like the majority of not white. Like how will I interact with people of color and people that are of the minority, that kind of thing. So I think it's really important. And I think the next question I have is like with like your content and how I became aware of you, and what I see as kind of one of your identity is like your kind of desire or your yearning to learn so many different things or have so many interests. Let's get into that. Like what prompted that really? Like, of course, I'm sure like you like to learn, have new hobbies and stuff, but what really made it that important for you that you had to document it and just keep constantly doing things to learn it and all that stuff?
Hmm. I think part of it was I started my Learn with Lels blog like shortly after I had finished school. And I feel like there's kind of like a misconception when you're finished school that like your learning is done. Like your learning is saved for like when you're a kid and going through like elementary school and high school and university. And when I finished school, I was like, what, 23? And I was like, I am just like a tiny way through my life. Like there's no way that my learning could be done. So I just wanted to ensure that I was like continuing to learn forever instead of just once I graduated school. And then I think also like going away to school, like as I was saying before, I was just like learning so much about like my culture and other people's culture and kind of like the bullshit that I believed growing up. And I just felt that it was important to learn about that, like learn about the biases that I had and um, kind of the shit that we believed in Curtis, like the white supremacy that existed in Curtis. Like I wanted to learn about that and also like encourage other people in Curtis to learn about um, the importance of diversity and like race related issues. So yeah, it kind of started out as being about like learning beyond school and then turned into like learning about other people and being empathetic toward other people's stories. Because I feel like if you understand people and their stories and where they've come from, then it's kind of makes it impossible to dislike them, if that makes sense. So I feel like it's just so important to learn about the people around you and people who are not around you. Just lifelong learning is important.
Sure. And you talking about like, oh, you're trying to just keep learning so that you can remove yourself from the biases that you had growing up. So talking about like, what were like one of the biggest things that you kind of recognize where like you want to unlearn, like other than like the white supremacy, or do you have like this particular point or example that you were like, oh yeah, this is something that I was trying to unlearn. Like, oh, it's so bullshit. Like, why do I believe it? And then you actually went ahead and like try to unlearn it, be more knowledgeable in that area and such. I'm just curious to know like what's the biggest thing that we're like, oh yeah, this I need to like stop, like if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I feel like the top thing that comes to my mind is like related to dating, which, oh God, I feel like it's going to sound so gross to say out loud, but I feel like I've had relatives who, like, especially older relatives, who've encouraged my sisters and I to date white guys with this misconception that it's, oh God, it's so gross to say out loud, but like that it's better to date a white guy. Like it would mean that you're better if you're able to date someone who's white. And that was like such a big thing that as I moved out of Curtis, I realized like that is just such a stupid and gross belief. Like, not that there's anything wrong with dating white people, obviously, but like every race, to date any race is a blessing. So that's just such a stupid thing that I hope my family no longer believes, like my relatives. Yeah. And I feel like in the Philippines, they use a lot of like whitening soap. Like that's really common. I know it's common in a lot of different countries. Um, but yeah, there was kind of this belief that like, oh, if you marry like a white guy, your children will be lighter, and like that's so much better. That's like a huge thing that I have realized is gross, and we need to squash that idea. And every skin color is beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. And like I would say like the whole concept of like, oh, marrying someone white would be better or whatever it may be. Just I think, yeah, it is bullshit. And like it's just plays on to like whole white supremacy and all that stuff. And then with the whole skin whitening, the colorism issue with like a lot of Southeast Asians or just South Asian as a whole, that's very like problematic or like something that needs to be addressed. But I think
Mhm.
all of those just all comes down to like the intergenerational trauma that has been already so ingrained into like Asian families. Because I think not all of these kind of stem from the fact that with colonization that has occurred and all that stuff. But like I think it takes time to unlearn that and also be educated. And I hope like more people could at least be more educated in it and make their own choices based on all these kind of from dating and all that stuff, because it could have impacts on future generations, as you obviously know, because you have to go through that process of unlearning it and like be like, oh, this is bullshit, I don't believe in that, and like I'm not gonna go on with this narrative and like live that kind of life, because I think of course like if you're in or if you found someone that is white, it's not an issue, it's a matter of like believing that's the best thing that could happen to you. I think that's the problem, because I think there's nothing wrong with marrying someone white as long as you get along and they have the same values or you're compatible. But to think like, oh, marrying white, that's the only way to go, or like it's the best thing, and it's kind of strange because I think white people won't necessarily tell their white offspring like, oh, you should date outside your race, it's better that way. But for a lot of Asian families, it's always like, oh, maybe you should consider marrying someone outside your race, even though there are other Asian culture or customs where it's like, oh, you better stay within your race or whatever. But then there's still a huge proportion of like, if it happens that you want to date outside your race, better make it white. That kind of feel like off to me.
Yeah, for sure. I will say though, like it's easier for me to be able to realize that that's a problem compared to like my parents' generation, because I feel like the people who first came to Canada, like their goal was just to fit in and like they didn't want to stand out. So I guess it makes more sense for them to cling to the Canadians who are here already and just try to fit in. Whereas for me, it's like, well, I was born here, so I feel like I automatically fit in. So it's easier for me to identify how that would be a problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I get that. And then I was also thinking like, well, actually, to be honest, for Asian to like cling on to the concept like, oh, marrying someone white would be better, but that makes you stick out even more in a sense, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
guess so.
But I
It's still all
also
twisted, and it comes down to colonization and
yeah,
how it's messed up, and we need to
and
learn about
yeah,
it.
and I think there's also like the really interesting idea of like, at least how I have seen it, where like if Asian parents are like encouraging like, oh, people are their offspring to like date white or marry someone white, it's often just them encouraging their daughters rather than their sons. At least how I see it. A lot of times it's like, oh, our daughters, oh, they could like go find someone that's white, but for the sons, like you should best stay within your race. Which I think there's an imbalance to that. Like at least keep it consistent. Like all of them, oh, it's okay, but like sometimes I hear or like see where it's like, why are there like more proportions of those that do end up marrying white being just the daughters rather than the sons, which I think no, we could get more into it in terms of studying and all that, but like it all really just come down to again colonization and like all that stuff. But
Yeah. Sorry, one
yeah,
thought I have about colonization, another thing that like I think about with Curtis, is that a lot of times you like when I was growing up, like you would get kind of racism toward immigrants. And I feel like if white people understood how they came to North America and realize that they too are immigrants to this continent, then they would be quiet and they would not be racist toward immigrants because they would realize that unless you're indigenous, you too are an immigrant. That's just a thought I had.
I think it's too far gone now. I think anytime we bring that up, I think the ones that could get offended that doesn't see it will be like we're attacking them rather than going critiquing the whole system that was in place where they benefited, they were also immigrants, but they want to be like, no, we're not part of that, because then it'll take away that no, their existence or their identity, which I think it's hard for them at a whole. But yeah, you're definitely right. Like they were immigrants as well. They're not native to the land and all that stuff. And the amount of indigenous rights that we give, not even close to what they deserve. But that's a whole
A million
another
percent.
issue. Like,
Yeah.
but I think
Yeah, that you could have like a whole podcast on that.
For sure. And like continuing with like, oh yeah, the biases you have, you mentioned like, oh yeah, the colorism aspect, like did it affect you a lot, or is this something that you grew up like knowing and like just be like, why is this a thing? Because obviously anything like skin whitening will affect your skin for the most part. Like the amount of skin whitening product I've seen in Southeast Asia, especially like Thailand, India, and such, is crazy. But that it's not natural because, to be honest, regardless of whether they're in the sun or not, a lot of them are born tan or darker, regardless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I feel like I didn't really witness that till I went to the Philippines, like the actual like skin whitening creams. And at that point I was like a little bit older and was kind of starting to have my awakening as to like the biases that I had. So um yeah. What was the question?
No, that's right. And that's I think we kind of got sidetracked a little bit, but we can get back to
Yeah.
like, oh, like the whole your blog and your podcast are all about learning. So initially you said it was all about longboard
Mhm.
and cooking. So can you get into why specifically those two to start? Like what got you into wanting to learn those specific hobbies or skills?
Yeah. So for cooking, I actually had a cooking blog like before this one. Um, just because I'm a terrible cook and I was like, I feel like I need to learn how to cook because it's an important life skill to have. I'm still pretty shit at it, but whatever. And then for longboarding, it started off because I wanted to learn how to surf. Um, I saw Blue Crush when I was like 9, and I was like, oh my God, this is the best movie ever. Like, I want to be a surfer girl. But then obviously, like living in Ontario, it's kind of difficult to learn to surf. So instead of surfing, I picked up longboarding. And then I actually saw a video of this Korean girl longboard dancing. And it was the most beautiful thing ever. And see, that's why representation is so important. Like to see like another Asian girl like doing something so cool on a longboard. And I was like, oh my God, I can see myself in this girl and I want to do that. So yeah, so then I started to learn to longboard dance. Um, but yeah, surfing is still a top dream for me too.
But I've known you and I've seen you like you surf now. So like, can you just talk about that as well? Like you actually got into it, and now you're like, oh, letting us know like, oh, surfing is a thing in Ontario, at least in our episode that we did. Like I did not know that until I like
Yeah.
talked with you. Like, can you just talk about that? Because it's no one would ever think, at least in Ontario, because I think people know like out in the West Coast in BC, Tofino, you can there are chances where you can surf, but Ontario, really? Like, can you talk about that?
Hmm.
I'm like was really shocked when you say, "Oh, I surf in Ontario." Whenever it's able to be warm enough, I'll do it, and even when it's cold, I sometimes do it as well. So it's like blew my mind.
Yeah. So the first time I surfed was in the Dominican. Like in my early 20s, I went to Dominican with a friend and like was able to do a surf lesson. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like it feels like exactly how I dreamed it would. So then like my vacations after that Dominican trip, I was like, oh, I always want to like incorporate surfing into it. So I went to Hawaii and did like a surf lesson. And then I was like, oh, like these one-off trips, like they're fun, but like I won't actually like pick up the skills. So then a couple years ago, I did a surf camp in Bali, which was amazing. It was super fun. It was just a week, but it was like a really great experience. Um, and then last year, I heard about Tofino and like that you can surf in Canada. So I was super excited about that. And I was working a remote job at the time. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna like go work, bring my computer and go live in Tofino for a month and just like work and surf. So I did that last October and was just like able to practice surfing every day. And it was like just the best time ever. Like I don't know, just such a fun, hard but fun sport. Like if you think you're athletic, like it doesn't matter when it comes to surfing. Like the skills don't transfer. Like it's just such a unique, different sport. And then yeah, when I got home from Tofino, I actually through my podcast, like I interviewed a did I find this woman, Robin? She's like a Filipino surfer who lives in Ontario, and I somehow came across her when I through my podcast. And then I interviewed her about lake surfing. And then she just like told me all about it, like how it's possible to do it on Lake Ontario. And like she told me like when the good times are and like how to know when the waves are going to be good. And then I kind of just like followed her lead after I got home from Tofino. I was like, oh, I still want to surf, even though like I'm not really near anywhere that's like popular for surfing. But yeah, I just like continue to learn about like the lake surfing community and have been going like whenever it's possible, which like in Tofino, it's basically good every day. And here on Lake Ontario, it's like, you know, you'll get like a couple good days a month, but it's still sweet that like I'm at home. Like there's truly like no other feeling to be like, oh, like I'm at home, like I'm in Toronto and like the CN Towers in the background and I'm like catching waves. Like it's so, so cool. Yeah, it's the best. It's like I wish that I could do it more frequently, and I wish that like I wouldn't freeze my ashes off every time, but it's still nice to have that option to be able to catch some waves here in Ontario.
That's amazing. And it's nice that you're going out there pursuing your like really one of your passion because that movie inspired you like, oh, that's something I want to do. And for you to now to do it
Mhm.
and to show other people that it's possible, hopefully other Asian girls be like, I want to do this because I see Kaitlin being able to do so, just like how that Korean longboard person did that for you and made
Mhm.
it really cool for you to want to do longboard. How about your longboard skills? Are you as good in surfing as you are with longboard, or which one is better for you in terms of how well you have able to grasp it?
I would say that I'm definitely a better longboarder. Not that I'm great at either of them, but I would definitely say I'm a better longboarder just because I'm able to practice like any day really that it's not raining or snowing. Whereas surfing, it's like pretty infrequent that I'm able to practice. Um, so yeah, I feel like I'm better at longboarding, but I feel like I'm still like more obsessed with surfing. Like I just love it, even though I'm pretty shit at it.
What about surfing really entices you or like makes you feel alive or like, makes you love it so much?
That's a good question. God, I feel like I'm gonna sound so cheesy, but whatever. I love surfing. I feel like growing up, like I was always very much like, oh, like you need to be productive and like you need to achieve and like get good grades and like win awards and shit. Um, and so like I've kind of always just been like stressed, feeling like, oh, I need to be productive, like I can't just chill. But then with surfing, like it's not about productivity at all. Like it's really just about being present. And God, I sound so lame. But yeah, surfing is just like all about like being present and like understanding the water and the waves. And it's just so peaceful. And I feel like it's just like exactly the hobby that I need. It's so like so different than what I was raised to believe about being productive. Like it's surfing is just all about like being present and enjoying and not being productive. And so I feel like that's part of the reason why I love it so much.
It's interesting for you to say why you love surfing, like the reasoning. When I hear it, like it does not make sense at all. Because for me, surfing seemed very stressful because you got to make sure you're on the board, you don't get caught by the waves in terms of like making you fall and all that stuff. Like maybe it's just me because I have horrible balance in anything that I do. So that it's like, but surfing with water involved, I don't know how I feel about that, but it's really nice that you're able to find something that makes you feel like you're able to be present. I think that's very important to having a very good kind of like relaxation point for you when you do a hobby. So you mentioned like, oh yeah, your blogs started from you like just documenting what you're learning, and now with your podcast is through you asking other people so you can learn from them and other people learn from them. So talking more specific about your podcast, like what kind of people do you normally get on the podcast, or is there a particular theme you want to cover, or like, and what have you learned the most so far with the podcast?
Mhm. It's honestly just been like people who I feel like I need to learn from, or who I feel like other people need to learn from, especially like people in Curtis. Um, so yeah, like I've talked to people about like race related issues, and like the questions that I asked them, like I knew would be questions that people in Curtis would want to know. So yeah, I've had like a few people coming on for that. But then, yeah, it's just like a lot of people who I find interesting or who I need to hear from at the time. Like I've had a couple people who are like therapists who help people who've gone through breakups. And like I asked those people to be on my podcast at the time where I was like, oh, like I need help in getting over this breakup. So I'm going to reach out to you, and hopefully you can help me in our conversation. And then I'm sure like other people will be able to hopefully relate and benefit from hearing this. Um, so yeah, it's a little, might seem a little bit messy to people who are like reading through the topics, but it's just, yeah, people who I need to learn from and who I think the world would benefit from learning from.
That's very cool. And from like hearing what you're saying about it, and also like the episode I've seen and listened to, like it seems a lot of it still goes back to your community. You want to help your community learn and help. Not saying that you think they're not good. It's just you want to improve their thinking, their like perspective is up, which I think is really important these days. Like it's all about helping
Yeah.
the community that you really love, because for sure you still love Curtis and the people, and like because it raised you and all that stuff. So it's nice for you to like give back in some sort of way through the podcast. And it's still entertaining because you bring in a lot of interesting guests with topics that, is nice to hear. Like the one time I heard you just interviewing about like your parents, and also then your sister who's a nurse, and then also a rapper that there's a lot of interesting
Yeah.
things that I think people should check out. And like
Thank
with
you.
you doing all of these kind of like podcasting, blogging, so would you say like being creative is very important to you, and this is kind of your outlet to kind of be creative, artistic, and all that stuff?
For sure. Sorry, when you were just talking about Curtis, like I just thought like just had a thought that yeah, since Curtis is not super diverse, like one of the things that I'm trying to do with my podcast is like bring the diversity to Curtis in a way, if that makes sense. By just like getting diverse people to talk to. But yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was your question again?
Just talking about like the whole aspect of you doing your podcast and your blogging, that must be like something that's an outlet for you in terms of
Oh, right, right,
creativity.
right.
So would you say you're like a creative person, and this is kind of like your main outlet to like release those kind of creative energy out to the world, and like you enjoy doing it, I assume? And just talk about that as a whole, because I think we could consider you as a content creator for sure at this point.
Yeah, I feel like though I've been having like a existential crisis. So yeah, I'll tell you, like I originally went to school for kinesiology, because my parents were like, oh, Kaitlin like gets good grades, so she's gonna be our doctor. And in my head, I'm like, oh, I don't really think that I want to do this. Like I since high school, like thought, oh, like maybe journalism would be like really like a good route for me. But my parents were like, no, Kaitlin, like you won't get a job in journalism. So you're going to try to be a doctor. So then I took kinesiology, and I actually really hated it and felt like so like not in line with myself. And then I ended up going back to school for journalism and communication. And in that program, I was like, oh, this is like 100% a better fit for me. Like I feel like so much more like myself in this program compared to kinesiology. Um, yeah, but then in the jobs that I had after journalism, I I worked for a magazine for a bit and it was okay. Like I wasn't in love with it. And then I worked like a few communications jobs where I was doing writing and doing some creative stuff, but it was very much like in another person's voice, like not in my voice. And so, yeah, part of the reason why I started the blog was because I was like, oh, I don't want to just be talking as someone else. Like, I want to be talking as myself. So the blog gave me an opportunity to do that. Though I recently got a new job. I'm doing communications at a hospital, and I feel like it's been giving me so much of like what I wanted from my blog and podcast. Like I'm like interviewing people for my work, like about their jobs and like and why they do them, and like all about their careers like in the healthcare field. And it's like I'm talking to all these amazing people and like write, like I'm able to be creative and write about them. So now I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my blog, because I feel like so much of the creative outlet that I needed from it, like I'm getting in my work, which is amazing. But now I'm just like at a crossroads, like not knowing what I'm going to do. But we'll see.
But that's awesome. Being able to find something in your work that aligns with your kind of interests, your hobbies, and your creative outlets, because I think that will make you less likely to burn out from your job because it's still what you enjoy doing, even when it's not your
Mm-hmm.
job time or work time. So like you talk about you working for a hospital now, like helping with like their kind of like content or creating things for them, like in terms of interviews for podcasts and whatnot. So a lot of things I've seen on your kind of social media also kind of relates to like mental health, which I want to get into. Like, are you like a big supporter of mental health, and like how's your relationship with mental health and therapy as a whole? Because I think that's something I care about, and also I've seen you post it, so I assume you are one that really cares about it and have lots of thoughts about it. Can you just talk about that? Because I think people will be interested.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like, especially because I took kinesiology, like so much was about physical health. And I feel like it's so normal for people to talk about physical health and like not feel any kind of shame about it. Whereas with mental health, like I feel like it's just as important as physical health, potentially even more important, because your mental health really impacts your physical health. Um, so I just felt like it was so important to have more people talking about it, and we shouldn't feel any shame to talk about our mental health. Like that stigma, like it's 2021, we need to get rid of it. um yeah, and around the time that I started my blog, I also started going to a therapist, um just because I felt that it would be helpful for me, because like I would exercise regularly and go to the gym, but like I wasn't really doing anything for my mental health. So I started going to the therapist around the same time that I started my blog, and my blog kind of just morphed into like an extension of my therapy. Like I would talk about the things that I was learning about myself through therapy, and like my blog post would kind of just like help me to organize my thoughts about what I was talking to my therapist about. And kind of just like solidified everything that I was learning about through therapy. So yeah, my blog was like really helpful for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And with like your thoughts on mental health, like what's kind of the biggest lesson you have learned from just being more present with like your mental health journey, and also like having a therapist going through your life with you, kind of helping you navigate like things that you might not be able to navigate on your own initially. So what would be like the biggest things you have learned?
Oh God, that's a good question. I feel like I'm just like always just learning so much about myself. Like we're all just like these freaking mysteries, and it's like we're all just so confusing and complicated. So my therapist is helping me like just understand why I am how I am, and then helping me to change the things that I want to change. But I think right now, one of the biggest things that I'm learning is the importance of just like letting go, which like a couple years ago, like I would like that is so not something that I would have been down for. Like I've always been like, okay, like set a goal and like be hardcore about getting that goal. But I'm starting to realize that like for the longest time, God, I sound like I'm talking to my therapist, but for the longest time, I think I associated like my self-worth with accomplishing things. And I'm realizing that that's stupid. Like we shouldn't be, like we should all know that we are just inherently worthy. We don't need to accomplish anything in order to get worth. So yeah, I'm learning to kind of just live my life and not feel the need to be so productive all the time, because yeah, I tied productivity with who I am. And no, we're all just these humans floating around just living. And we like, if we want to enjoy life, like I don't know, like ticking off all these boxes, I don't think is the answer. I think to be present and do the things that make you happy is the key. And letting go is somehow connected in all of that. I
Yeah,
don't
for
know if I'm
sure.
making sense right now. I'm
You're
just like
making
word,
sense.
like
I
brain
think
something.
I think those are really good lessons to have learned, and like hopefully people can hear this and like I don't think a lot of them, if they're listening, if they're going through these kind of issues, can be like, oh, listen to it and like, oh yeah, yes, this is it. But at least hopefully they could understand like, oh, if they are thinking like, or they want to think like you, then it's okay because someone else is also doing it and on the same path. I think a lot of the
Mhm.
barriers we have with ourselves would be like we don't think other people feel the same way or like going through the same thing. So therefore, when we want to stray from the normal path, we are scared, and then we're not making the necessary moves that will make us feel better. Like the whole kind of productivity thing, the issue. I think a lot of people have the same idea of like, oh, I don't want to have to be that productive to feel self worth, but they see other people being productive and they think that they're doing it because they think it's the right thing to do. But in fact, maybe they're all struggling with the whole concept of being productive is the only way of self worth, and they're trying to change that. So if more people talk about this or talk about mental health as a whole, then maybe we could all work together to unlearn things. I think the whole episode right now is just about unlearning and learning everything at the same time, which is great. I love it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think you raised a good point. Like not put productivity as the main driver or main indicator of success or self-worth, because I think there's more to life than that. Because I think being productive
Mhm.
is key if you want to get things done, but sometimes like you need to give yourself room to just be present, and sometimes being present doesn't mean that you get things done. It's just be looking around and feeling content, being at peace, and letting everything else be moving around you, but you're still present. I think that's the most important. Like even then things are all changing, you're still there, be able to see everything that's happening without like affecting your own like sanity or your own inner peace. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. Where like even though the world is burning per se, I still present. I can see what's happening, but it doesn't affect my inner self, because I think so much of our lives has always been like having external factors affect us rather than letting our
Mhm.
internal self guide us in terms of how we feel and how we move upon in terms of our lives. I think, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's like what I've been thinking about like hardcore lately, like just redefine. That's I'm working on a blog post about that. Like redefining what success is. Because I feel like we all want to be happy, but so many of us tell ourselves like, oh, like when I get this boyfriend, I'll be happy. Like when I make this amount of money, I'll be happy. When I get this amount of followers, I'll be happy. But then once you reach that point, there's always going to be another thing that you want. So it's like you're continuously on this like ladder climbing for happiness. But I feel like the people who truly are happy are the ones who are like, everything I have right now, like I'm grateful for, and I have what I want. And it's not necessarily like the go-getters who are out to make millions of dollars. I think there are studies that it's not like the millionaires and billionaires who are the happiest. It's like the monks who are like chilling and present.
Because they
So
saw the
yeah, I
light.
feel like
They
yeah,
see the
I
light
feel like
and
we need to redefine success to not be like a certain number in your bank account. It should be like, am I feeling like I'm at peace? Like am I good with where I'm at? Like I think that's what we need to redefine success as.
yeah, for sure. And redefining success will take a long time, and sometimes that would involve like having outside variables be at a minimum, or like you moving out on your own and living life on your own, which leads me to the other question I have, because
Yeah, I
like
like how
I
you did that.
know,
That was
yeah,
smooth.
like hopefully it's a good enough segue. Is like talking about you living in the big city in Toronto where, for the very first time officially, in terms of like all on your own place and such. So can you just talk about your experience, because you moved like I think in during May or earlier in the
Yeah,
year.
I moved in May, so I've been here May, June, July, August, like 5 months now. Oh my gosh, that's wild. I can't believe how fast that's gone. But yeah, I'm living like right in the heart of the city. I have like this tiny little studio apartment. But yeah, it's been going really well so far. Like I'm really loving it. I'm lucky that like I'm super close with my family, so I like FaceTime them daily, so I don't really get lonely. And like I have a lot of friends in the city, so I'm lucky in that respect. But I am learning that I don't need a lot of things. Like I have a super tiny place. And I find that I'm just like trying to purge my stuff because it's like I don't really have much room for it. So yeah, I'm realizing I don't need a lot of like material things to be happy, which is nice because it saves me money. Um, and yeah, no, I love like Toronto is just like such a great place like to explore. There's so much going on, like so many restaurants to check out and so many people to just people watch. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
that's great. And do you are you enjoying living alone as much as you have anticipated, or it's still a little different that than you expected?
Yeah, for sure. Like I definitely have like a great community who I can lean on. So like I don't really get lonely, but like it still is like a lot of time on my own. So I think like I'm glad that I started going to therapy when I did because I'm spending so much time by myself. Like it's important that like the thoughts in my head are good because they're typically the only thoughts that I'm hearing because I'm by myself a lot. Um, but yeah, it's been good. I'm surprised. Like a couple of years ago, like I would have yeah been very surprised to be this independent. Because before, like whenever I would do something, I would like call my mom and be like, "What do you think about this?" And like, should I do this? And now I'm just like, no, bitch, you're counting on yourself now. So it's good. It's good life progress.
That's great. And having lived in the big city for a while now, compare that to like your whole life living in a small place, removed from like the city. Do you feel like it's where you want to live in the city for the foreseeable future, or you still feel like the small city, small town kind of thing is more your kind of speed or like your preference?
Um, I don't think that, at least right now, who knows? Like, I don't think that like small town suburbia is where I'll end up. Yeah, I definitely love like being around like so many people and diversity and like food options and just like so much to do. Um, and I love Toronto, but with that said, I'm also like, I feel like I have like more adventures like brewing up in me. Like once my lease is done here, um, I don't know, I would love to like move somewhere else. Although like I'm really loving my job too, so I wouldn't want to let that go. But my dream would be like to keep my current job, but then also be able to like check out other places. Like I do love BC. I don't know, I love traveling, so who knows?
And you want to find a place where you can surf every day. That would be the
Yeah,
ideal.
that is like that's a true top priority for me. So yeah.
Hopefully, you're able to do so. I think that will do a lot for yourself in terms of your mental health, but also your content. I think more content will be made with you just, enjoying life and doing things you really enjoy doing. So it's towards the end of our kind of episode today, which has been really nice. I enjoyed the conversations. You learned a lot, which
Me
I
too.
think by going through your content and just following you, you'll learn a lot as well. So people should definitely follow you. So where can they find you and your content?
Sure. So I'm on in Instagram, and it's Learn with Lels. And then I'm also on Twitter, which is how I met Robin. But that is just my name, Kaitlin Jingco. Um, yeah, I've been kind of quiet on social media lately, but feel free to still say hello to me.
Yeah, and your website and your podcast?
Oh yeah, duh, sorry. It's called Learn with Lels. And yeah, you can find my podcast basically anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And my website is learnwithlels.com.
That's great. Again, thank you so much for this conversation, and it's been a blast. And hope to stay connected. And all the best to you in all the things that you do. And on that note, thank you for listening to What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. And join us for the next time. And make sure to follow this podcast on the social medias, Instagram, and also make sure to follow the podcast on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, and also subscribe to the podcast on your streaming platforms, and feel free to leave us a message. And also, if it's on Apple, leave a review or a rating. Much appreciated. And until next time, bye bye.